Many saw this as a preview to the Pac-12 championship game way back in the offseason, and it certainly could reach that potential as we've got Oregon visiting the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA. And of course, it's the Chip Kelly Bowl of sorts. We got Tony Syracuse on the line from Last Word on College Football to help us break down a big one in the Pac-12. Hey, Tony.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
I am good. How you doing?
I'm well. Well, it seems everyone's pretty excited about this game this weekend.
I'm excited. As I just mentioned to you, we looked it up here that Oregon opened as a field goal favorite, 3-point favorite. It has switched to UCLA. So there's money coming in from somewhere. Troy Aikman or somebody's laying down major wagers on the UCLA side as a
someone in West LA
right
is ponying up some money for sure.
So this UCLA team just got by Washington 24-17 on the road, which doesn't on the surface look like an impressive win. We know that the Huskies have been struggling, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but any win on the road in conference is a good thing. And another big day turned in by one Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, it was. And I think one of the things that you have to look at was, you and I talked in the summer and again before the season started, this 3-week stretch of UCLA football was going to determine the season. You had the game in Seattle against Washington, this game at home against Oregon, and then next week on the road against Utah. That's a pretty tough stretch of 3 games for anybody. And especially for a team that was, kind of on the ropes the last 3 years during the Chip Kelly era. And so this was going to go a long way to determining how the season turned. The last 3 games of the season are against a very bad Colorado team and a very bad Cal team, and then USC, who is, take your pick from one week to the next what the Trojans are going to be, right? So this was going to go a long way. They took care of business in Seattle, and while the score may not have looked like UCLA dominated, it really was probably one of the most complete games that they've played all season. Part of the UCLA challenges have been the up and down play of Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. His stats have looked good, but when you watch the games, they're built off individual halves of football. He had yet to put together 2 complete halves in one game until Saturday. And I got to tell you, it had a lot to do with the play calling and the scheme that they devised to go against Washington. If you're going to ask Dorian Thompson-Robinson to take a 5-step drop in the pocket, go through his 2, 3, 4 progressions and fire it 40 yards downfield, your odds of winning are not good. It's not that he doesn't have the arm, because clearly he does, but he tends to try to put the ball into spots where he can't get it in. He overthrows, he overthinks, whatever the case may be. What UCLA did Saturday against Washington was more of a quick reaction type of offense. Shorter passing game, nothing more than 14, 15, 16 yards. I don't think they had more than a couple of completions over 20 yards. And if they did, they were shorter passes that then turned into yards after catch. They're using the running back, Zach Charbonnet, as you mentioned, and Britton Brown out of the backfield a lot more, and Casimir Allen as well, who's got tremendous speed. So there's a lot more quick reaction, just get the quick drop back, fling it out. Don't go through too many progressions. Don't look to throw the ball too far downfield. They also used a jet sweep pitch probably 4 times during the game. Those, and you know how NCAA statistics work. Those actually count as passes because you're flipping the ball forward. There's 4 of his completions for good yards. That's not to denigrate what DTR did. He had a good game. The execution was good, of a good scheme and good play calling. I mean, he went 21 of 26 for a couple of touchdowns and about 183 yards. So the yards weren't tremendous, but the execution of the game plan was really good. And then, as you said, the running game, Washington was one of the worst run defenses in the country going into the game, giving about 181 yards a game, and UCLA rolled them for about 240. So they took advantage of Washington's weakness. It was, again, about as complete of a game as UCLA has played this year.
Tony, I caught the Arizona State game. I didn't see much of this Washington effort, but the Arizona State game was a game that was razor close at halftime, and
Yes.
then the Sun Devils just took it home from there at UCLA.
Great.
This is a curious football team in that, of course, we can go through the highs and lows of the season, which included an extremely bizarre loss against Fresno State at the Rose Bowl as well, in which they allowed the Bulldogs to drive the length of the field in like 30 seconds.
Right.
Is this team about where you thought they would be? The record says 5-2, but this is a very scattershot, sporadic football team that has some tremendous talent in spots, but I guess we're seeing the sum of what we should expect.
Yeah, I think, when you and I talked before the season, we saw a lot of odds makers putting the over-under on wins at 7.5. And I teetered between the under and the over at 7 or 8. And I finally landed at 8, before the season started, because the talent was there. It's been there. And it's one of the most experienced teams in the country. They were number 2 in the country in terms of production returning going into this season. The question was the execution. And the execution on defense in particular, which has always been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. Let's not kid ourselves. The defense didn't all of a sudden turn it around. The run defense, the numbers are good, but we have to also acknowledge reality in that the numbers are being put up against teams that don't have good run offenses. I mean, LSU, up until they beat Florida the other day, had one of the worst run offenses in the country. There's a whole other set of questions for Florida to have to answer based on what happened. But to the point, most of the teams they've played have not had a viable run offense. And so the numbers are a little slanted, if you will. They still have a tendency to get beat deep sometimes, although Saturday, the game was put on ice by a freshman defensive back, Devin Kirkwood, who had a tremendous interception with about 5 minutes left in the game that the play would have gone for a touchdown otherwise. So the talent has been there. The execution hasn't always been. This is going to be an interesting game Saturday because Oregon's quarterback, Anthony Brown, is not a threat to go deep. He is not efficient throwing the ball downfield. He's a good running quarterback. He throws well on the run, but it's an intermediate passing game. It's a short passing game, 15 yards downfield. So he's not a threat to beat you deep, which gives the UCLA defensive backs a little bit of a break that they desperately need and probably changes the way you defend the Oregon offense.
Oregon played its best football game of the year, obviously in Columbus, Ohio, and beat Ohio State and put it all together in that game. Anthony Brown was not prolific in that game, but he made all the right decisions and all the right throws, and he did make a couple difficult throws, but most of them just very efficient and played off of the running game, and the defense was phenomenal. They just played a great game. Other than that, they are slipping by opponents with defense and Anthony Brown looking pretty shaky as of late. You feel that this is going to be a stiff challenge for UCLA. Obviously it is, but even more so maybe than the average observer, because you really look at that UCLA offense against Oregon's defense as being, again, a serious challenge to put up some major points in this game.
Right. And look, Oregon has been hit hard by injuries this year. And Kayvon Thibodeau has spent much of the season on basically what amounts to a snap count. Only allowed to play a certain amount since he suffered a high ankle sprain early on in the season. He had to sit out the first half of the Cal game last week because of an absurd targeting call 2 weeks prior in the Stanford game. And they've got Noah Sewell back at presumably about 100% health. We talked to Mario Cristobal yesterday, the Oregon head coach, and he is very open about injuries and the health of his team. He is the anti-Chip Kelly when it comes to talking about the health of his team. And it seems like these guys are ready to go full speed. Now, because Thibodeau has been limited in his play, the numbers aren't there. But if you watch him, just watch an Oregon game, and there's no doubt that this guy is, by the NFL standards, one of the top 3 draft picks coming up next year. A lot of guys have him at number 1. He really is that dominating. When he went into the Cal game in the second half, I mean, my goodness, he was in Chase Garber's face the rest of the half. I mean, it was pretty amazing to watch. And Noah Sewell, even with his injuries, he still got 54, 55 total tackles on the season already. So point being, that defense is tremendous, even with the injuries. They really are that good. UCLA, like I said, is going to have to rely on the run game. They just, that is the strength of their game. It is Charbonnet. It is Britton Brown. Even some running from DTR. I mean, he had 80-ish yards rushing, some quarterback draws the other night against Washington. So if you do that, you've got a chance, but it's got to be, again, that quick offense, that quick movement, quick release from DTR, because if you're sitting back in the pocket, Sewell and Thibodeau will destroy you. They just absolutely will. So if you make it so that your players are constantly in the move, you constantly have players in motion to move the linebackers along and make them carry running backs out of the backfield, you've got a shot. But that's where the game is going to be really tough for UCLA.
Got our guy Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football. Please join him, the rest of the crew there at Last Word. They do a tremendous job covering the game we all love. Last Word on College Football, Tony, Kevin McGuffey, Jason Ray, they do a great job. Absolutely. So talking UCLA, big game coming up at the Rose Bowl against Oregon. So I'm going to guess that the next question I give you is going to be much easier to answer a week from now. Okay. But I'm going to ask it anyway, because this seems like one of those landmark games for this particular season, that if UCLA loses to Oregon, most UCLA fans are going to be like, yeah, this is what we thought we had. A bowl team, they're going to be okay, whatever, but nothing special. But if they win this game, then, okay, we might have something here. We're excited. We're energized. This might be a really nice record at the end of the year, and maybe we get to a Pac-12 championship game. If you look at the standings, it's a 3-1 record for both UCLA and Arizona State. Utah's got a decided advantage, not just because they're 3-0, but they've beaten Arizona State thanks to a 28-point comeback, down 2 touchdowns, won by 2 touchdowns to be more precise, against Arizona State on Saturday. And of course, the Sun Devils have beaten UCLA head-to-head. So UCLA is going to have to do some work, and obviously that game against Utah on the road is going to pretty much be something that is a must-win for them. But as I opened this statement up, I got to think that most UCLA fans are on the fence and waiting to see how this plays out against Oregon.
You would think so, wouldn't you? And I'm not seeing it in the fan base. I'm seeing that they are on the verge of giddiness already. Look, the Oregon game is the biggest game in the Chip Kelly era at UCLA. This Saturday is yes, they've played Oklahoma, they've played other teams, they played big games, but they got hammered in the big games, right? I mean, they got manhandled by, the Memphises, Cincinnati's, Oklahomas, whoever else you want to name, in what were supposedly the big games. And that's the reason Chip Kelly went into this season 10-21. And you had a fan base that was trying to convince themselves, as much as others, that there was dramatic improvement last year out of a team that finished 3-4 and gave away the last 2 games of the season. Man, you got to take a pickaxe and go really hard to dig to find that improvement. It was an eye test kind of thing. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. This is improved. They are improved, verifiably, certifiably improved. To your point, the question is how much and where does it get them for the rest of the season? And, the last 5 games. Look, you've got a fan base that in some corners, they're like, hey, 1 more win and we're bowl eligible. Man, I look at that. That's a pretty low bar. With the most experienced team UCLA has had in probably a decade, that's what you've come to appreciate, that you get 6 wins, you're bowl eligible. I don't think that's good enough, but there is a huge part of the fan base that is accepting of that right now. There's a large part that says, hey, we can go 7-5 and get to a little bit better bowl, and then that's a good season. Maybe. I think anything short of 8-4 is a disappointment. But there are some who go beyond what I'm looking at, and they're like, there's no way we don't win 9 games. And to which I say, hang on, just take it one. I know you're all feeling pretty excited. Take it 1 week at a time, because this Oregon game, like I said, is the biggest game. And then regardless of the outcome, whether UCLA wins or loses, next week, the Utah game is going to be the biggest game of the season because, look, UCLA and Arizona State are tied right now for second, but Arizona State has the tiebreak on their side because of the head-to-head with UCLA. So that you need Arizona State to lose again somewhere in there. You need to go and beat Utah. There are a lot of other things that have to happen before you start talking about a conference championship game. I think right now, most people in the UCLA world who aren't directly associated with the football program have put away a thought of a conference championship. But let's get to a really high-end bowl game. Let's do that. 8-4, 9-3 would, put people over the moon. But I think 8-4 would be readily accepted by pretty much most of the fan base. And I think if you're looking right now and you're 5-2, you're looking at what those last 3 games are that we talked about with Colorado, with Cal, with USC. You have to figure you're going to win 2 of the 3. You could win all 3. You really could. But you should factor in 2 of the 3. That gets you to the 7 right now, which means you got to beat Oregon or Utah to get to that 8-4. I think beating them both is your sites could be flooded with the UCLA fans who going crazy and celebrating for the next few weeks. But I think that's looking too far down the road right now. I think you can easily justify an 8-4. Bearing in mind, and I know people don't want to hear this, and the UCLA fans don't want to hear this. You have to get to there with this team, this roster. Because the flip side of having the most experienced team in the country is your roster is going to be gutted next year. It is going to be the consummate rebuild next year. And so you better do it this year. You got to get to that 8-4.
So part of me wants to say, get to a conference championship game, and that's a successful season. But considering what UCLA's been under Chip Kelly for these 3 years, and at the end of Jim Mora's tenure, it would be nice to split the next 2 weeks, Oregon, Utah, in whatever fashion. And
then, I don't think it matters what fashion. I don't think you win one of the two. It doesn't matter. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't. I think you need the Utah win more if you're going to compete for the conference championship, because as you pointed out, Utah's got a pretty significant advantage right now. But I think UCLA fans, I don't think they're really very optimistic about the Utah game. Late October in Salt Lake City, the time hasn't been decided yet, but it's probably going to be a night game. You haven't done well there in, forever.
Yeah. So again, there's part of me that says UCLA can win all these games. So why not say, let's win them all and get to a Pac-12 championship game, or beat Utah, lose once otherwise, and get to a Pac-12 championship game most likely. But the realist in me says they need a high-end win, and that would be either this week against Oregon or against Utah. So split those 2, and then I believe that they're decidedly better than all 3 opponents at the end of the season. But the probabilities say that they're going to trip up against one of them.
Right.
And so that leaves us with a 3-2 finish, and there's your 8-4. Right there.
Man, I agree with that. They are better than the 3 teams they finish off with, but you never know what happens in that USC game. You just don't ever know. I don't see any world in which Colorado beats them right now, or even Cal, but that USC game is always a landmine. And so Again,
Yeah.
you get to that 8-4. Now, 8-4 puts you in a situation where, Chip Kelly gets to keep his job. Anything below that, don't know. Yeah, you really don't know. One of the stats we dug up that we put in a piece last week, which is just, I don't know what prompted us to look for it, but we found it, and it's a very strange stat. Over the last 20 years, UCLA has played in 4 bowl games with an interim coach because they fired the coach at the end of the season. Bob Toledo, Carl Durrell, Rick Neuheisel, Jim Mora all qualified for a bowl game in their final season as they got fired. And 6-6 is not going to be okay to keep Chip Kelly. They'll qualify for a bowl game at 6-6, but Chip's not going to be around to coach it. Not likely. 7-5 is on the border. 8-4, I don't think there's any question he stays and gets the 5th year of his contract and probably gets a 1-year extension.
Tony is a Pac-12 guy, and Oregon is the only team that can represent the conference in the college football playoff. Is it important to you that Oregon makes the playoff?
No, it isn't. I mean, do it because I cover the Pac-12, and would it be swell to see a Pac-12 team in the playoff? Yes. Do I think Oregon can get there? This would be the 1 year where they might be able to do it, because you're looking at the ACC and scratching your head, and you don't assume there's an automatic bid going to the ACC this year. So maybe there's an open spot, but who are you going to put them in ahead of? I mean, if you look ahead, I've already got 2 teams from the SEC going in, because you assume a Georgia Alabama conference championship, and as long as it's a viable game, even if Alabama loses and comes out with that second loss, they're still likely to get in, because it's Alabama who lost the conference championship, and I still think the committee puts them in. You're looking at the Big Ten champion, probably at this point. You're looking at Ohio State even with a 1 loss. But then that's where you get to Oregon and say, well, hang on. If Oregon's got 1 loss and they beat Ohio State, don't you put Oregon in? Maybe so, but the playoffs are where strength of schedule comes into play, much more than at any point during the season. And you're looking at Oregon playing Slippery Rock, and that's not a joke. They actually really did. And so you're looking at some of those games. You're like, hey,
Stony Brook. Let's not get our rocks.
Stony Brook. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. With Stony Brook, not Stony Brook. So there is a creek somewhere and some water and whatever. Point being, that hurts them a little bit. You're going to get, you've got in all likelihood a Big 12 champion in there if Oklahoma remains undefeated, or even Oklahoma State. And you're going to have to put Cincinnati in if they run the table. You absolutely have to. So Oregon needs a lot of things to happen in order to get there. If they don't get there, does it crush the Pac-12? Not really, because in 3 years, you're going to expand the playoffs to 12 teams. And, once everybody's had their say and figured out how the system is going to work, and it'll happen when the current charter is up in 2025, and Pac-12 teams will get in, and, it'll be fine. So does it have to happen this year? No. Would it be good? Sure. But it's not. Look, a lot of people like to say, oh, the Pac-12, and they roll their eyes, and the Pac-12, they don't do this and they don't perform then and whatever. You know what? Have the same conversation this year about the ACC and then get back to me. The Pac-12 is no worse off than the ACC right now. So it's and I see you kind of shaking your head. But look, there were teams in the ACC who were supposed to perform at a higher level, and they aren't living up to it. And I'm not just talking about Clemson. I'm talking about North Carolina, and I'm talking about other schools who were supposed to be better, and they aren't. So to me, this year, the Pac-12 is no worse off than the ACC. And you don't want to hang your hat on that, hey, we're not as bad as these guys, or we're no worse off than these guys. But I don't think it hurts the Pac-12 if Oregon doesn't get in.
For the first several weeks of the season, because there were tons of non-conference games being played, I was tracking the metrics regarding the Power 5 conferences, And when the Pac-12 was able to go out there with that UCLA win against LSU, which doesn't look as good now, but regardless, still a decent win. And then, of course, the Oregon win against Ohio State. I was ranking the Pac-12. Again, this is not based on what I think or what's happened in the past or perception, just based on the results on the field as they unfolded this year. The Pac-12, I will say, somewhat decidedly over the ACC for the first couple of weeks of the season. But then the losses just started to mount and mount and mount. And if you look at the overall metrics, the ACC still played much better outside of conference than the Pac-12.
There's no question. And ACC teams played a better schedule outside of the conference for the most part. There's still some of the regional games that are head scratchers, but you didn't have, Washington losing to Montana and, games like that, which hurt the conference. Look, the marquee victory for the entire conference right now is that Oregon game at Ohio State. That is the marquee win that is carrying the entire conference right now, because Ohio State is still a viable playoff contender. None of the teams that UCLA beat, the LSU win felt really great at the time. And it's still a good win because it's a blue blood SEC team. But you look at what LSU is, and it's a mediocre team. So, in the rear view mirror, the win doesn't look as big as it did at the time. And there aren't a lot of other marquee out of conference games that the Pac-12 has played that you can point at and say, wow, that was big, or this one was big. It is that Oregon game in Columbus that is carrying the entire conference right now.
For sure. Arguably the best win in the country. If you go by the rankings, It is the best win in the country out of conference.
And if you watch the game, it was the best win. It was the best game for the conference completely, because of, even though the score was close, it felt like Oregon was in control of the game throughout the game.
Yep.
And so, even just watching it, putting aside the numbers, the stats, the rankings, just watch the game. And it was a complete victory over one of the top teams in the country for the past 10 years.
Absolutely. UCLA at the Rose Bowl against Oregon. Huge matchup in the Pac-12. Tony Siracusa, last word on college football. Folks, please like the video, share this video out on social media, and subscribe right here. And again, last word on college football. Check out what they've got concerning the game we all love. All right, Tony, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Glad to do it, Mark.